3 ordinary nights, 3 ordinary rooms, and 3 people who discovered the horror waiting just beyond the door. From a silent flat in London, to a thing crawling up the stairs, to a motel window that should never be opened. These are the stories that will keep you awake long after the video ends.
Story 1. Flat number 6. Nobody lived in flat number 6. As far as we were aware, it was empty. The date was October 1992, and my wife and I had moved in almost 2 months ago. We had bought flat number 5 and were quite content to live in it. It was a neat, cozy little apartment with a kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, and one room which merged the living and dining spaces. Not to mention it came cheap and was only a 10-minute walk from the train station. Sure, the wallpaper was a little fuddy-duddy and the kitchen designing was a little 70s, but with a bit of paintwork and a few trips to the furniture store, we would hopefully make it work. The little outer London neighborhood was appealing too. It was the kind of idyllic suburban places where there is enough traffic on the streets to reassure you that you aren't in the middle of nowhere, and there is little enough traffic to let you get to sleep soundly. The high street had everything too: a doctor's surgery, an optician's, a dentist, and a Tesco supermarket. At any rate, we were feeling nicely settled in by the end of 2 months and had high expectations of our new life in England. You see, we came over from the States, and in spite of the fact that the English speak the same language as Americans, there were aspects of living over there that were entirely alien to us. It was home, but yet it wasn't quite home. The weather was also something of an issue. Not a disappointment though, as we'd had a great deal of forewarning about the clouds and the rain that fill England's skies in the autumn and most times of the year. Perhaps now I should turn the focus back to our new home. Ours was number 5 out of 6 flats which belonged to a tidy apartment block with the name Gretel Cottage. It was situated midway along a street which held a mix of detached houses, blocks of flats, and even a few guest houses. Gretel Cottage had 3 levels to it. On the ground floor, the hallway led to flat 1 on one side and flat 2 on the other. On the first floor, flat 3 shared the landing with flat 4, and likewise flat 5 shared the second floor's landing with flat 6. There were no other levels. In our first week there, we had taken time to get to know the residents of the other flats. Rather, they had taken their time to come upstairs and greet us. They were friendly lot for the most part. There was a Miss Miggins in number 4, a Mr. Smith in number 3, a French woman in number 1, and one other fellow in number 2. Remarkably, not one of them could have been younger than 65. I was 24 and my wife 25. Yes, I guess we did feel a little out of key with our neighbors. They never seemed to go out unless for groceries, and that seldom. We went out daily. More remarkably yet, not one of them didn't live alone, widowed or divorced. I suppose it's a lonely time, old age. You get the feeling that nobody wants to talk to you, you feel detached from your loved ones. Back in our apartment in Ohio, literally all of our neighbors had been young couples or families. There had been a great deal of noise over there. We heard children's shoes bumping along down hallways and a great deal of both grown-up and children's laughter. Sometimes we even heard quarrels and parents scolding their children, and of course that meant very loud crying. But we had been surrounded by life and youth, and the place had seemed brighter and cheerier. Gretel Cottage was different. It was nice and quiet. So quiet that sometimes it felt lifeless. Perhaps the dreary weather added to it, but the lack of sound gave the building a subtle lonesome feel about it. It was sad in a way. Actually, it was a bit eerie. The good thing was that we spent less time at home than we did outside. We both worked the standard 9-to-5 office jobs in the inner city and returned home at about 7. As for weekends, we went out pretty much all day both days and came back at times ranging from 6:30 to beyond midnight. When home, we were either watching the telly, making dinner, or simply unwinding. Sometimes we went to the gym, sometimes to the cinema, sometimes we just sat and talked and talked and talked. We had a good time, I'll admit. And then there was flat 6. There was nothing immediately remarkable about it. It had an oaken door and front porch, identical to all the others, with a knocker and a bell and a bristly brown doormat. A brass 6 was fixed in the middle with nails. Nobody had opened that door to greet us on our arrival, and after a week of seeing not a thing go in or out, we assumed that the flat was empty. And what could be wrong with that, right? Well, I know it sounds childish coming from a man of my age, but there's something very slightly unnerving about an empty house. I'm sure you've all had a house on your street with no dwellers in it, and I'd bet many of you sometimes got the chills when you walked by it in the evening. Come on, admit it. Empty, abandoned houses are creepy. Well, with flat 6, it was like that, but different. Worse. All day and all night, the empty flat was literally on the doorstep of our home. When we opened our front door to leave in the morning, that ominous door stood in wait for us, looming. When we returned home, we would turn the key in the lock and know that the dreaded door was behind us. Imagination would make us wonder, what's in that flat? And what if it opens light now and comes out? Alright, fair enough, that's a bit of an exaggeration. It wasn't really that bad, just a little weird, that's all. And I'm ashamed to tell you this, but when I said we and us, I ought to have said I and me, because to be honest with you, my wife didn't feel in the least put off by flat 6. Yes, I know it's shameful. I am a jumpy, nervous sissy, I admit it. We had different teenage years. She went out and saw all the horror films she could, while I saw few enough to get the creepy side of my mind working, but not enough to dampen my imagination. We still went out for a scary one now and again, but I was never the one who suggested it. Now that I've given you more than enough background knowledge on myself and my life at that time, and now that you have an idea of how brave a man I am, I should probably hurry up and tell you some of the things that happened in late October 1992.
Nothing truly weird took place until the postman came one Monday. I remember I was sitting at the table with a plate of half-finished scrambled eggs, a cup of tea, and watching the BBC News. There was a scuffling of paper being shoved through the letterbox and the damp clank as it fell shut. My wife was back in a moment with 2 letters. One of them, she explained, was an advert from some insurance company, and the other was a bill. She left them on the table, and we returned to breakfast and the news. So far, so good. Then a few minutes later, we tidied up, switched off the television, and stepped outside. Something struck me as off as soon as we locked the door behind us. It hit me in a second. There was an envelope lying on the doormat of flat number 6. My eyes searched the door and I noticed that there was no letterbox, or rather, that the letterbox had been boarded up. I didn't need to point out the envelope to my wife, you couldn't miss it. A neat white rectangle, yellowish at the edges, sitting unobtrusively on the doormat. She gave a puzzled frown, looked curiously at it for a while, and then made a start as if to go and look at it. I caught her by the arm immediately, for some reason. "What's up?" she asked, even more surprised by my reaction than by the envelope. "Don't," I began, clearing my throat, and not letting go of her, nor letting the envelope out of my sight. "Leave it." She looked at me with a kind of pitying smile, shook her head, and told me that I was being silly. But she listened. Thankfully, she listened. I sighed and thanked her. I just didn't want her to go anywhere near the letter. It didn't feel right. I got a strange call that day at work, during my lunch hour. I had just finished my smoked salmon sandwich and was about to tuck into a cookie when my phone began to ring. It wasn't unexpected or anything, because I get calls all the time when I'm at work from colleagues. It wasn't a colleague. I could tell as much. "Hello? Who's this?" I asked quite clearly, but all I could hear was the crackly hiss that you hear in the background of a call. "Hello? Hello?" I asked. Then I can swear I heard laughter, a kind of gleeful snigger, as if it might be some teenager prank calling me. But I was not sure if it was a teenager. It sounded old, kind of weird. I was a little weirded out, so I hung up and checked the number. Strangely enough, the number was very similar to the number of our flat, but 2 digits were different. I guess it's a neighbor or something, maybe the estate agent. I told myself that, but I wasn't so sure. The estate agent wouldn't have laughed at me like that. Then something else weird happened. I got home before my wife and was just turning the key in the lock when something made me look back. The envelope on the doorstep of number 6. It was gone. I stared hard at the door for a while and it seemed to stare back at me. My imagination threatened to scare me, so I opened the door to my own flat as quick as I could and shut it behind me. I remember I felt a little anxious for my wife to get back soon. Something about the letter being gone had me creeped out. Somebody was living in flat number 6, and they had come out to pick up the envelope while I had been away. I turned on the TV and made myself a quick cup of tea, sitting, brooding, and not really watching the screen as I waited for my wife's return.
When she came back, I told her to wait in the flat while I checked something outside. It was pretty abrupt and unexplained, but she waited while I ran down the stairs and out of the building to check the windows of flat number 6. I saw that the curtains were drawn, and the panes had been in need of a clean for ages. When I got back to the flat, my wife had also noticed the absence of the letter. She was standing just at our doorway and pointing at the doormat of flat 6. "Have you seen?" "Yeah, I know," I butted in. "There's somebody there. I'm pretty sure there is." She strode up to the door of number 6 and was about to ring the bell when I cried out to her, "Don't do it!" "What's up with you, Matt?" She looked at me in a slightly concerned way and then raised her hand to ring the doorbell. "Please don't. I don't like it," I protested like a child. "I seriously don't get you sometimes." She shook her head. "This is stupid. I'm going to ring it." And she did. We listened, her calm and ready to greet whomever it was, and me tense and not sure if I wanted to meet them. As I'd half expected, nobody answered or even seemed to move inside the house. If the whole envelope incident hadn't taken place, then we would have been convinced it was empty. "What the hell? There's nobody there. I suppose they're out." My wife assumed that in her realistic, matter-of-fact way. "Out?" I protested. "They've never been out as long as we've been here. There's somebody there, all right, but it's some kind of antisocial weirdo. Either that or they just died a while after they picked up the letter." I don't know why I said the last bit, but it got me even more freaked out. "Maybe, Matt," my wife began as we made our way back into our own flat, and as she turned the living room light on, "maybe there's nobody there and the caretaker simply picked up the letter as it hadn't been taken." I wasn't 100% convinced, but that was fine with me. I liked that explanation a lot more, so we stuck with it and ate dinner. "Oh, and by the way," my wife asked me later as we got into bed, "did you get a call today at about 2 o'clock? "Yeah, a weird one with some guy laughing?" "Yeah, I got something like that too." "You did? Who do you reckon it was? Not many people here have our numbers, you know." "I'm not sure. I expect it was the estate agent's kids playing pranks, maybe got our numbers off their dad's phone." I agreed, but I didn't stop thinking about that until I fell asleep. I dreamed about flat 6 that night. I dreamed that I opened the door to it and could only see pitch darkness inside. I dreamed that I listened in and heard that same sniggering laughter from somewhere in the darkness. On Tuesday night, I came home to find that I had forgotten my keys and that my phone had run out of battery. You can imagine how frustrated I was when I found that my wife was not home and that I had to wait on the landing for her to get back and open the door. You can imagine how anxious I grew when she wasn't back an hour after the usual time and I couldn't get through to her. And I bet you can imagine how uneasy I got as I sat on the landing within 3 yards of the door to flat number 6. You know when you're alone and vulnerable to getting spooked? You seem to think of the last things you would like to spring to mind when you're feeling tense. Last night's dream, for instance, kept playing upon my mind, and I thought that at any moment the door to flat number 6 would burst open and something would come out and see me, and I would see it. Clearly my wife was trying to get through to me as I could hear the telephone ringing inside our apartment. She expected that I had gotten home. I was glad that she was all right and able to ring me, but it made me nervous to think that she was probably getting anxious about me as well. Then I looked at flat number 6's door again, and I could swear I heard a click, a tiny noise, come from somewhere inside that apartment. I frowned and listened closely, but didn't hear anything else.
After that, I went outside to escape that dreaded landing for a while. She still wasn't back, and it was 9:30. Heavy rain started and forced me back inside and up to the landing. I was almost considering asking a neighbor for a phone to call her, yes, at that time of night, but to my great relief, at a little after 10 o'clock, she came up the steps to the landing and was startled to see me slumped on the floor outside the door. "Thank goodness, I was getting worried about you. Where have you been?" I got up and spoke rapidly, catching my breath. "My colleague offered to drive me home, but the traffic was horrendous out there. I tried to call your mobile, but it's out of battery, isn't it? What about you? Why aren't you inside?" I explained apologetically that I must have forgotten the keys inside the apartment in the morning. She sighed, unlocked the door, and we stepped in. While I searched for my keys, they were strangely not on the key hook. My wife turned on the lights, and I heard her gasp a little at the answer machine. "Look how many missed calls there are on the telephone." "Yeah, you must have been calling me nonstop," I told her. "I only called you twice on the home phone. There was like 6 missed calls, and hang on, come over here. What is it?" I hurried to see what had put the worried expression on her face. I looked at the numbers for the missed calls. 2 of them were my wife's mobile phone number, and the other 4 numbers were the same number. "It's the same number as those weird prank calls we got yesterday." She seemed now more irritated than nervous. "Goddamn kids." She deleted the missed calls, and we went to bed without dinner. It was a bit late, and we were both exhausted. I never found those missing keys.
Wednesday was worse. I got more calls from that number, but the hoarse, unfriendly voice at the other end was saying things now. I was shocked, intimidated even by what I was hearing. The voice was saying the vilest things, talking about rape, murder, and using pretty much every swear word in the book. The thing that really got me scared about the calls were how much the person at the other end seemed to know about us. He knew my name, my wife's name, and that we were from the States, as he referred to us as filthy Yanks more than once. I made up my mind to report this fellow at some point, and as I was on my bus home, I blocked his number. There was peace for a while, and then, just when I thought I wouldn't hear any more from that nasty, irritating son of a bitch, my phone rang again. I was amazed to see what I thought was the same goddamn number calling, but then I realized that it was not that number, it was our number. Somebody was calling me from my own home. I picked up and asked frantically if it was my wife at the other end. That ominous crackling sound followed, then that same mocking, sniggering laughter. It took me a few seconds to register how serious the situation was, and when I did, I almost vomited with anxiety. I jumped off the bus, sprinted home, burst up the flights of stairs, and came up to the landing, where I collapsed with sheer, utter terror. The door to number 5 was open. "Oh my God," I cried aloud and staggered to my feet, rushing into my flat to catch the intruder. There was nobody there when I looked, so I rushed out of number 5 and broke the door to number 6 open by force. Hell, I would have gone in there and showed that thing what happens to people who mess with me, but when I saw that bare, empty, dimly lit hallway beyond the door, I could not force myself to enter that place. I was a coward, and I collapsed, and I fainted. The police searched flat number 6 very thoroughly when they arrived, and also looked around our flat as me and my wife stood on the landing in between and just stared into space. We felt violated, as if somebody was deliberately trying to make us feel unwelcome in our own home. She even suggested moving out, which was drastic. I don't blame her, she had received a few of those calls lately as well. We were reassured, if not a little frustrated, when the police claimed that they had found nobody in either of the flats. Interestingly, flat number 6 had been empty after all. We ourselves even took a look around in there and found absolutely no traces of anybody living there. There wasn't a phone in flat number 6 either, so whoever was calling us couldn't have been living there. Further investigation showed that the envelope had actually been meant for Miss Miggins in number 4 downstairs, and she had checked upstairs because her son who had sent the letter had in the past mistakenly addressed his letters to number 6. My fears about flat number 6 had obviously been sheer paranoia. There was nothing to worry about, so it seemed, in flat number 6. As for my keys, they were found lying on the landing outside the flat. The intruder had obviously dropped them there before he had made his getaway. We gave the police the number that had been troubling us, and they told us sincerely that they'd look into it and arrest the perpetrator for breaking and entering, as well as for going against the 1988 Malicious Communications Act. More or less as reassured as a person can be after having their home broken into, we both thanked the ready-faced inspector and the 4 constables before bidding them goodnight and closing our front door. We sighed and fell wearily onto the sofa and watched the TV for a while. It was some kind of sitcom, Faulty Towers I think it was called. We fixed ourselves a small dinner and watched in front of the telly, laughing at the bits we found funny and laughing anyway at the bits that weren't too funny. At about 11:30 we turned off the TV, washed the dishes, and turned in for the night. Settled into bed, I was about to turn off the bedside lamp when my wife told me to wait a little. She had her mobile phone in her hand and a kind of smirk on her face. "Why don't we give the prank caller a little taste of his own medicine?" she suggested. "He won't like being called up at this time of night." "Sure, do it," I said, liking the idea as soon as I heard it. "What are you going to say to him?" "I don't know. Suppose I'll just make creepy noises or something, anything to get back at him." "Sure, go ahead." She dialed the number and we were chuckling to ourselves gleefully as she called. We were quiet for a while, grinning stupidly while the phone connected. Then a noise from our living room wiped the smiles right off our faces. A phone had started to ring in the living room. Story 2. I now live in a 1-story house. There were 2 rules we had to follow when we were living on the 2nd floor of the old apartment building. First, lock your door at night, and second, be very careful at the top of the stairs. These were natural rules since, despite the front door being locked, you had to be really sure of 2 full floors of neighbors to leave the door unlocked, especially during the night. As I understood it, the management of the house used to be really strict about the locked doors thing, and had put up signs all over the place telling people to lock their doors. I heard from the man next door that they sometimes even went around at night and rattled all the doors, making sure that they were all locked. But of course, they completely denied being so invasive as that. I had never heard them at it, but I had been known to sleep perfectly content through an earthquake, so that was no indication. As for the stairs, it was just a simple reminder. They were steep and slightly tricky stairs, and I heard there had even been a couple of deaths from falling down them. It was good to remind people. Nothing wrong with that.
Besides, my sister and I were happy there. Leanne had been fortunate enough to get the room directly across from mine, and we were old enough to actually enjoy each other's company, despite the traditional feud that comes between an older brother and his younger sister. To tell the truth, the feud still existed, but had become more of a cheerful rivalry than anything else. We were happy. Just happy. Things weren't perfect, granted. We were in an area that had constant thunderstorms, and the power was as often out as it was functional. My room had a continuous smell of strong soap, and although that isn't at all the worst thing it could smell of, it was a bit tiresome after a while. Leanne's room developed a troublesome lock, and half the time the bolt would click out the moment someone pulled at it. We wanted to move out, sure, but we also wanted to wait until we could each be sure that the other could too. If only we had known. If only there had been even the slightest flicker of menace, but there was none. There were no cold spots, no abnormal shivers when passing over a certain area, no strange noises but for the occasional rattling of the knobs in the night. Nothing. Not until that night. I awoke in the middle of it simply out of thirst. I first tried my sink, obviously, but the power was out, so the pump wasn't running. Annoying, but the landlords kept a tank full at the top of the stairs exactly for this purpose. Really, I should have thought to fill up my own jug whenever there was a storm warning, but however many times I had thought of it, I never quite managed to go through with it. I went out to the landing, torch in hand. Halfway to the tank at the top of the stairs, I tried to click it on and found that it was dead, but that mattered little. There was ambient light, and lightning frequently flashed through the skylights with which the architect had a love affair when designing the building. I got to the tank and began filling my bottle, when out of the corner of my eye, I glimpsed movement halfway down the staircase. As I looked, there was nothing, though it was that kind of nothing that happens when you're staring at the object you're looking for, that sense of it being right in front of you if only you could see it. Then, by the flash of the lightning, I saw what was really there. It was crawling. It had to, as it had no legs that I could see. It was like a torso cut off right above the hips, reaching out with both hands and pulling itself up the stairs, one slow, painful step at a time. Black tatters shrouded it, I suppose, because clothes wouldn't fit right on that thing. It was shrouded in the black tatters, and where they failed to cover, blank space showed. Not black, and definitely not white, but rather a simple absence that I still cannot think of without my stomach rising in protest. This space was not empty, as the vacuum beyond our planet is, but rather it was less than empty. It hungered, it sucked in, it was the opposite of all that was material and physical. Then the lightning flash faded, but I could still somehow perceive its shape continuing up the stairs. Even as I turned to run, another flash lit the room, and as though it had sensed my intent to flee, it lifted its head and... I'm sorry, but I will never set to word, neither spoken nor written, my full description of its lack of a better word. It was simply all that a face should not be, and since this time, there has not been such a horrible sight, so fearsome, so terrifying, that has impressed itself upon me in the least, for how could it compare? That is the one triumph, I suppose, that I bring from that night out of all its horror. I shall never again be cowed by the sight of evil, for the worst done by man is but the palest reflection of the visage that faced me then. I ran. What else could I do? I ran to my room as fast as I could and began fumbling with my keys, all the while becoming aware of a faint, slithery drag thump coming from the stairway. How far up had it been? Halfway? 2/3? How many steps did it have left? Finally, I forced my key into the lock, yanked the door open, dove in, locked it again, and collapsed, the adrenaline suddenly gone. I had no time for introspection, however, as I suddenly realized that I could still hear the thing, now up on the landing. It was still crawling. I could hear the hand-over-hand slither of it as it came straight to my door. The handle moved. It rattled for a moment, then got still. Even as I started to let myself relax, I heard the door of the next room over rattle, but it too was locked. I heard it go to the end of the hallway, rattling each door in turn, testing the locks. I sat and prayed that none of the other tenants had left their door unlocked, leaving themselves open to that terror. Then,
As it had come back and was almost across the hall from me again, I thought, "Leanne, please no." Its slithering movement was clearly across from me. I listened, hoping, praying for a rattle. The lock clicked, and the door creaked. I couldn't help it. I grabbed the useless flashlight as a club and threw open the door. At the same time, there was a clatter and an all-too-familiar scream from the direction of the staircase. I ran towards it, other tenants opening their doors and peering out, working torches lighting the hallway. There was some glimmer of hope in me, some faint wish that if I got there fast enough, she would be all right. But no. There, at the bottom, crumpled like a broken toy, the marks of hands fast fading from her ankles, was Leanne.
Story 3. I'm at your bedroom window. A warning for my fellow travelers: if you ever have a layover in Philly overnight, don't spend the night at the Economy Motel. And if you absolutely must, steer clear of room 103. I was heading south to visit some family members for a few weeks, and unfortunately, the only flight available included a 7-hour layover in Philadelphia. Not wanting to spend those hours huddled outside the airport, I rented the cheapest motel I could find and took the shuttle over at about 11 p.m. The place was just about the shadiest looking motel I'd ever seen, but it was a bed, right? I checked in and headed to my room, 103. Exhausted, I immediately collapsed on the bed, a bit lumpy but not terrible. Not bothering to take my contacts out, I closed my eyes and let my thoughts wander. I was yanked back to reality by a loud grumbling from my stomach. Right, the airline hadn't fed us. Annoyed, I dug around in my bag for one of those microwavable soup cups, which I tossed in the room's microwave. As the microwave rattled away, I noticed a piece of paper wedged underneath it. I yanked it out and unfolded it. There were 2 words scribbled on it hastily: "Don't look." Huh. Whatever. I tossed it aside and retrieved my soup. Feeling lonely, I hopped online to see if anyone was on. I was in luck. My long-distance boyfriend happened to be on Skype. I called him up and we chatted a while, trying to keep our voices down. Eventually, though, he said something that made me laugh, and I heard a muffled curse come from upstairs. Feeling guilty, I said my goodnights and ended the call with the intention of getting a bit of rest before my next flight. As I lay in the now dark room, I noticed a thin stream of light coming from where the curtain didn't close completely. Annoyed, I got up to close it. I was almost at the window when I heard it. "I can see into your bedroom." The voice sent a chill up my spine. It was very quiet and high-pitched like a child's. It was so soft I wasn't sure I hadn't just imagined it. I shook my head and reached for the curtain. "I know you can hear me. I'm at your bedroom window, and I know you can hear me." I dunked back as a shadow crossed the stream of light coming into my room. I definitely hadn't imagined it that time. There was a voice directly outside my door. Someone was out there looking in. I jumped back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. "I'm at your bedroom window. I know you can hear me. I can see in your bedroom. Are you listening to me? I know you can hear me. Come, take a look. I'm at your bedroom window." The taunting went on and on, rattling into my thoughts and leaving me paralyzed in fear. Suddenly, I heard the tenant upstairs moving around again. Footsteps stomped over to the door above, and I heard muffled shouting. "Hey, shut up down there. This isn't funny. I have work in 4 hours."
The door upstairs slammed, and there was silence. I breathed a sigh of relief and leaned back against the pillow, determined to get some sleep. "I'm still out here. Come look out your window." I sat straight up, heart pounding in my ears. The voice was back. It whispered on and on, repeating its mantra over and over again. I put my hands over my ears and rocked back and forth, trying to block out the sound. It was no use. The longer I sat there, the louder it got, until I could hear it so clearly. It sounded like it was right next to me. Frantic, I picked up the phone and dialed the police. Stammering and stuttering in fright, I managed to give them the information, where I was, what was wrong. Please help, I'm scared. I didn't care if it was a prank at this point. My mind was reeling in terror. The officers assured me they'd be over shortly to see what the issue was. I thanked them and hung up the phone. As soon as I did, silence descended over the room. It wasn't just that the voice stopped. No, utter silence filled the room. The air conditioner stopped, the street noises outside ceased, even the faint hum of electricity from the TV and lights went away. It pressed on my ears with a tangible heaviness that sent shivers through me. Next to me, my phone rang. The caller ID told me that it was the police station, calling me back. Cautiously, I picked it up and answered. "Hello?" I whispered. "They aren't coming," growled the voice, and every light went out, plunging the room into complete and total darkness. In the dark, I fumbled for my bag. I might not have had a flashlight, but I did have my video camera, which had a weak light on it. Besides, I can't deny I wanted to film this, if only to prove that I wasn't going insane. Finding it, I turned it on, casting a dim light over the room. Even with this light, the shadows still consumed the edges of my vision, making me jump at every perceived motion I caught in the corner of my eye. Shaking, I forced myself to focus on the camera. Carefully, I stood up from the bed and walked toward where I thought the curtain was. The thin light from the camera only served to give a vague outline of the curtain and door, as though the darkness that had swallowed the room was even now working against the light from my camera. Carefully, I reached out and touched the curtain, pushing it closed all the way. Whatever was out there couldn't look in now. As I did, I heard a loud clicking sound next to me, like a latch turning in the door. Panicked, I whipped around to look at the door. Inexplicably, it had opened on its own. The latching sound I had heard, however, was the door getting caught by the extra security lock. I could see nothing through the crack, just more inky blackness outside. I slammed the door shut again, double-checking the locks and latches. Everything was in place. I breathed a sigh of relief. That's when I heard it. A sort of scuttling sound coming from the back of my room, somewhere in the direction of the bathroom. Cautiously, I moved slowly toward the noise, trying not to keep my hands from shaking too badly. I knew whatever footage I got was going to be a mess of wobbly camera, but my videographer skills weren't exactly my top priority at the moment. I approached the source of the noise, but found nothing there, except for another piece of paper, wedged up partly behind a wall-length mirror next to the closet. I fumbled to open the folded-up scrap, trying not to tear it in my haste. When I finally got it open, there were only 2 words: turn around. I was not about to do anything of the sort. Trembling, I slowly looked up at the mirror while pointing my camera behind me at the same time. To my horror, the light from the camera illuminated a faint silhouette of something behind me. All I could make out was a vague form no taller than the height of the bed, and it was moving toward me. I broke out of my paralysis and dove into the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. Quietly sobbing, I leaned against the door and slowly slid down until I was sitting on the cracked tiles, the door firmly closed and locked behind me. Whatever it was scrabbled a bit at the bottom of the door. Then came the whisper. "Let me in. I'm out here in the dark. Let me in." "Go away!" I screamed. The voice stopped abruptly. I shivered and let out the breath I had been holding in tightly. I still clung to my camera, unwilling to let go of the one thing that was keeping me tethered to reality. I sat there until the rays of early sunlight began peeking under the door and I knew it was safe. Carefully, I cracked open the door and peeked around. The coast was clear. In a rush, I grabbed all my luggage and raced out the door. The hotel manager looked at me kind of oddly, but I wasn't going back in that room. I spent the next hour waiting for the shuttle in the lobby. The flight to my aunt's house was short and uneventful. I spent the flight running over what had happened over and over in my mind. Could it have been a prank? Who could have done that? It didn't matter. It was over. I was out of that insane place, on my way to family and friends. I tried to put the whole thing behind me and just enjoy the ride. I've always loved flying. Watching the world fall away behind me is one of the most incredible feelings. The patterns beneath you, the rivers and ponds and winding roads, spotted here and there with cottony clouds shadowing the land. This time, however, I just couldn't enjoy the scenery. I was too on edge from the previous night's events. The plane finally landed, and I just about ran to meet my aunt and cousins. Finally, I could start my vacation and get back to a normal state of mind. I hugged my aunt and my little cousins so tight just to be sure they were real. We all laughed and packed up the car with my luggage to head home. I didn't tell them about the motel. That night, my aunt made my favorite, pan-seared salmon dripping with lemon and butter. Since she lives so close to the beach, it was fresh from that day's catch. I don't think I've ever had anything so sweet and fresh. Sitting here with my family, I could almost laugh off the events of the night before. Almost. Silence descended upon the house as night fell upon us, bringing with it a thick fog. The little cousins toddled off to bed, yawning and rubbing their eyes. My aunt and I sat quietly in the living room, her reading, me silently recalling the night before, over and over again. Finally, exhausted, I got up and announced that I was heading to bed early. A bit surprised, my aunt wished me good night and I headed to my room to collapse. Once alone, however, I felt unease creep in around me. The only lamp in the room was the bright overhead, too bright to sleep with. And with the fog as thick as it was, no light came in from outside. As if that wasn't unsettling enough, at the foot of my bed was a large window, and there was no curtain, only a Venetian blind. I shivered and turned on my side so I couldn't see the window. Slowly, I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke up sometime around 3 a.m. to an odd squeaking noise, like nails running across glass or tile. Confused, I sat up and looked around. Blinking, my eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. Still, I could see nothing that could be making a noise. In fact, it seemed to be coming from somewhere outside. My heart rate quickened as I approached my bedroom window with apprehension. With shaking fingers, I reached for the pole to open the blinds. I yanked down with one swift tug, and the blinds flew open. Nothing. I let out the breath I had been holding in a rush. I had only imagined it. Or had I? As I glanced down, I noticed the long, slightly smudged mark near the bottom of the window, as though some grubby hand or paw had run along the glass looking for a way in. I dropped the blinds, dashed back to bed, and pulled the covers over my head, desperate for some sleep. It seemed impossible that I'd ever get back to sleep after that, but eventually I drifted off, dreaming of strange noises and small, scuttling creatures hiding just at the edge of my vision. I woke up in the late morning, head wreathed in fog from a restless night. My phone was buzzing next to me. Squinking, I glanced at it to see that I had 5 unread messages, all from my aunt. I shook my head, not wanting to bother with it at the moment, and fell back against the lumpy pillow. Something was wrong. My eyes flew open and I sat up. No! Even without glasses or contacts, I could tell that I wasn't in my room at my aunt's house. But no, I couldn't be. I wasn't. No. I was. I was back in the motel room from the night before. I tried to scream, but only a choked cry escaped my lips. I looked back at my phone. Every message from my aunt was a variation on, "Where are you?" Still in my pajamas, I ran to the door, threw it open, and dashed to the office. In a panic, I ran in and immediately started begging the manager for help. He looked up, startled, not at me, but at the door I had just come in through. That door again. I thought I fixed that damn thing. Without a single glance at me, he walked over and shoved the door closed, giving it an extra push with his shoulder. He hadn't even seen me. Later, I returned to room 103, numb and confused. As I sat on the bed, I heard the voice one last time. "You're mine now," it taunted me. I didn't care. I couldn't even muster up emotion anymore. I've lost count of the days I've spent here by now. I don't think I'm dead, just not quite synced up with the rest of the world. These days, I'm the one leaving the notes, warning travelers not to look out the window. Most of them laugh when they see my scribblings, but I don't worry too much. It's the people that dwelled too long on my message that worry me. They're the ones that might end up like me someday.
There's a young couple staying here right now. I'm sitting outside now, waiting for them to quiet down and go to sleep. I'm trying not to think of how life was before I ended up here. I mean, I've tried leaving, but I can't get past the parking lot entrance. The only knowledge I get from the outside world now is from my phone and the occasional news program I watch during what passes for a continental breakfast at this motel. I think the two inside have fallen asleep. Well, he has at least. I'm not worried about him. His girlfriend or fiancé or whatever, I'm concerned for her. She's still up, eyes darting around. I know she saw my note, and she's definitely upset. She's a perfect target. Excuse me now. I'm gonna go huddle in the closet, with my hands over my ears. The voice is going to start soon.
3 stories, 3 warnings. A locked door means nothing. Silence is not safety. And if someone whispers at your window, don't look. Thank you for watching. We'll meet again in the dark, right where the next story starts.